Yo, yo, it's your boy OEG. Hit it. We're going to be talking about the new movie, you know what I'm saying?
It doesn't sound like that.
I don't know. That's my really terrible, non-authentic impersonation of Alan. I'm sorry, man. I just want to hold a beer for once on this channel, man. You're always holding a really nice beer, and I don't get shit.
It's a lie, man. It's Fanta. Great.
Yeah.
Some corn syrup.
It's good shit. Speaking of good shit and forgotten shit, we're talking today about movies that no one remembers. It's horror movies. We're still in the October season, so we're going to be talking about horror movies that people have sadly forgotten about that are actually good. All of these films, I think, should be watched at least once. Sure, some of the movies on this list probably are not as memorable as, say, something like Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street or Night of the Living Dead, but I think they are better than people give them credit for. So let's start with number 5. Number 5 is a movie starring Linda Blair. Linda Blair, just like Jamie Lee Curtis, she was very popular during the time of The Exorcist. She made a lot of horror movies. Some of them didn't work, like Exorcist 2: The Heretic. Terrible movie. But she did a lot of other horror movies, some with Wes Craven, like Summer Fear, and the other film that's on this list, which is a slasher film that's very unique and very different. It uses a little bit of comedy. I don't know if the comedy is intentional, but it works with this movie. The movie's called Hell Night. This movie you can find now, I believe, on DVD. At the time when I first saw it, it was only available on VHS. I still own that same VHS. And Linda Blair is at a party, at a costume Halloween party. So it's a perfect movie to watch on Halloween because it's just people dressed up as different characters in Halloween. And they're invited to this weird castle. And sure, this one has jump scares, which I'm not a fan of, but there's some unintentional humor here and there with some of the jump scares that you see. But basically, there's a killer on loose. You don't know who is the killer because everyone's dressed as some character from a Halloween movie. So anybody with a fake knife could be the killer. You don't know. So it creates a little bit of tension. And Linda Blair at the time, she was gorgeous in this movie. I've met her in person. She was very nice. She gave me an autograph and I spoke to her for a little bit. I mentioned her this movie and she doesn't remember. She doesn't remember a lot of the movies she's made. She was just trying to get me into becoming a vegan. She was mentioning this like product that she's trying to release that's like eating healthier, and that's great. But I got the movie assigned, but she didn't remember it. But it's a shame. But the movie itself, I guess, is not just forgotten by general audiences. It's also forgotten by the actual person who starred in it. I'll let that make you not want to watch this movie. Watch it. It's actually worth giving it at least a one-time viewing, especially with a couple of buddies on a Halloween night. Number 4 is a movie that I actually want to get on Blu-ray. If anybody wants to, you can go to my wish list, the best guy wish list, which doesn't exist, and don't. I have this movie on VHS, and I got it just because the cover looked pretty cool. The cover is just a woman in bed waking up, and she's seeing like this weird, like demonic, like spirit in front of her. And the cover looked pretty cool. I was like, hey, let me get this. And the movie is The Sentinel. This movie came out at a time when there were a lot of like rip-offs of The Exorcist. Some of them didn't work. Movies like The Possession, or no, the Possessor, a rip-off, a town rip-off of The Exorcist, terrible. But then you had good ones like The Entity and The Sentinel, which did not do a direct remake or rip-off of The Exorcist. They tried using the basics of that storyline and do their own thing with it. In The Sentinel, it's a woman who moves into this house, an apartment building, and she likes where she lives, but spoiler alert, everyone who's there is dead. She doesn't know it. But you kind of find this out early on. Thing is, the things that happen in this movie, you start questioning her decisions, like why is she still staying in this house? And why is certain things happening? But it all kind of makes sense. And it has a young Jeff Goldblum in this film. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this was the film where they dubbed Jeff Goldblum's voice because the director thought he sounded too goofy. Well, he's someone who has a very distinct way of talking, like Christopher Walken and Tommy Wiseau. You're tearing me apart, Lisa. But no, Jeff Goldblum, his voice was dubbed, but he had a small part in this film. The lead actress in the movie did an excellent job, being genuinely scared of this entity that's in this apartment building. It's a lower budget film. It's kind of self-contained. but check it out. Is it worth getting on Blu-ray? If you are a horror fan, yes. If you're a casual viewer, just check it out. I'm not sure there's any streaming services. Sadly, most streaming services just show you the most random, generic shit that's out there. So, but if you want to see something that's generally scary, there's some sequences. The guy who played Mickey and Rocky plays one of the creepiest characters in this movie with a cat. And I've never seen, I don't want to describe exactly what happens, but it's like so freaking creepy. He appears nude in one scene. And it's like, never thought I'd see Rocky's trainer naked. Anyway, but again, don't let that detract you from watching this movie. It's actually worth watching. It's actually generally scary. I really want to get this eventually on Blu-ray. Number 3 is actually not a scary movie. It's actually pretty funny, even though it is a horror movie. And that movie is The Stuff. The Stuff, I see now people mentioning a little bit more in horror conventions and stuff like that, but no one really mentions it when it comes to like something they actually generally want to watch in a horror movie marathon. And the story is basically there's this alien goo that arrives that looks like yogurt. It looks like yogurt or pudding or whatever. And someone, instead of like reporting the police or anything, they just grab it and they just start storing it and they start selling it conventionally to grocery stores. And people are buying it, and they start, eating it, and they start getting addicted to it. And before you know it, they either explode or become these weird aliens. It has a lot of cool, interesting, neat, practical effects. Some of them work, some of them don't. There's one particularly towards the end that's pretty bad. But I like the tagline. I like the poster. It's literally just an open container, flipped over, like spilling out. And the tagline is, "Are you eating it, or is it eating you?" And only in the 80s could you get away with stuff like that.
Sounds like a cat
Is it eating or is it eating you? But no, this movie actually, I have it on DVD. I'm not sure if it's on Blu-ray, but some of the acting is not very good, especially the politicians and the military people in the film. They don't do very well. The main actor I like, he's a little wooden in certain scenes, but it still works. It's not scary, but I like the effects, and I like the fact that it's pretty funny. Yeah, I think it's forgotten, and I think this one, if you like horror comedy, definitely buy it. Definitely get it in your collection. I don't think it's just a movie that you should just watch once. You should revisit it. Number 2 is a movie that I think a lot of people hated, and even myself, I've hated it before. So both the original and the remake are named the same, and they're made by the same director, and no one mentions this movie. This movie is both a horror and a thriller at the same time, and this movie is called Funny Games. The original was made in Austria, and both the original and the remake are identical, scene by scene. And I've said before that remakes like Psycho, which are scene by scene, do not work. I think this is the only remake that is scene by scene, that is the same, identical, almost to the T, but it's different in terms of the performances. Naomi Watts is different than the original actress. Everyone gives a different, and Tim Roth is also in the remake. Either one, watch it. People hate this movie for a particular scene involving a remote control. I won't say what happens, but I get it. Even when I saw it, I was like, this is fucking stupid. Like, everything leading up to that point was so great and so suspenseful and so genuinely scary, because it's a home invasion film. It's just two people, two rich kids who like playing golf, and they just feel like terrorizing a family just because. And I originally heard this film through a buddy of mine, and he likes to recommend movies that are gonna get me upset. It's the same person who recommended to me that terrible movie, the Serbian film. Yeah, good friend. Funny Games, when I first saw it, I was upset because he knew, and most people are upset at that particular sequence. But watching it a second time and then watching the rest of the film, it works because it's a very different way of showing a storyline. It's not your typical, like, it uses the home invasion horror element and does a twist on it, like a big 360 twist on it that for me initially didn't work. But on a second viewing, while I'm still not very happy about it, it still works in terms of being different and just subverting your expectations. Number 1 is a movie that, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I really like, and I think you should definitely own this and give this movie a second chance. The movie is Exorcist 3. The original Exorcist movie is a classic movie that still stands up today as being one of the best horror movies, effective horror movies. When this movie was originally released, people were actually passing out. It was controversial. Of course, by today's standards, it's just another horror movie. And there's been so many like possession movies throughout the years, like exorcism films. Exorcism of Emily Rose, as Exorcism of Motley, well not Motley Crue, something else, Molly something, I don't know what it's called. There's so many. Exorcism of Blackwater. And then there's the most recent one called The Lax Exorcism, and they got a sequel, The Lax Exorcism Part 2. Fuck out of here. The sequel that came after the original Exorcist, Exorcist II the Heretic, was awful. It was laughably bad. It's definitely one of those good bad movies. Because every sequence involving an exorcism or involving a sequence that's supposed to be scary just comes out very, very laughable. It almost feels like those really cheesy Italian horror movies that are not very good. Movies like The Visitor, or Zombie 2, which were unintentionally funny. It almost feels like it's in that realm. But Exorcist 3 came around, which was based on the book called Legion by William Peter Blatty. It ignores the events of Exorcist 2 and just follows several years after the events of the original Exorcist. And it maintains the same type of tone. Thing is that I think people have really poor memory. And that goes to what we're talking about today about forgotten movies. People remember The Exorcist as being this gory horror film. Watch it again, and you'll notice that the first hour and 45 minutes of that movie is a psychological film, and it's really, the main character of that film is a priest. He's a guy who's losing faith, and he wants to abandon the church. It's not really Linda Blair's character, it's really the priest. Like, she's in the story, and there's an exorcism going on, and people either mention Linda Blair or Father Merrin being the main characters. Father Merrin appears in the first 10 minutes of the film, and you find out that he has encountered the Pazuzu demon before, and then it just cuts to the priest whose story is about leaving the faith and abandoning the faith. And there's like a lot of creepy elements that people don't mention because it plays more like a psychological film. And I've always seen it as that, as a mixture of psychological thriller and horror. It's a film that starts off as psychological, and by the second act, it turns into a horror film. That's how I've always seen The Exorcist. And Exorcist 2 just tries to go straight horror, and it ends up becoming garbage. Same thing happened with Exorcist the beginning, where it tries to also go for that extreme horror element and became terrible. Paul Schrader, who originally was the guy who directed the original Exorcist the beginning, which was retitled to Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, is another forgotten one that plays more like a psychological film. You decide whether or not the events that are occurring are true or not. Same thing is the case with Exorcist 3. Exorcist 3 is the legit and worthy sequel to the original Exorcist because it maintains that same element. Psychological for the first 45 minutes, and then it starts giving you certain horror elements. You also have the priest from the original film again, and you also have Brad Dourif playing a really interesting character, who's I think is an underrated actor. People always mention him as a guy who plays Chucky, but he does a really, really good job here playing this character, which I don't want to reveal too much about. And there's some really crazy sequences that are genuinely scary that come out of nowhere and they have no explanation. And I've said before, we're usually scared of what we can't explain. And there's a lot of sequences here that you just can't explain, and they're genuinely creepy. And Exorcist 3 has two different versions. There's a version you can find that's been finally released that's complete. They took out certain sequences because they thought modern audiences at the time, this is 1990, wouldn't have the patience to sit through close to 3-hour film. But if you don't want to watch that, you can still watch the theatrical and still have a good time with it, and I still think it's a smart film. It's available on DVD and Blu-ray. I don't know if it's available on streaming. Again, most good horror movies are not on streaming. That's why I think Blu-ray should still stick around for a few more years. So yeah, Exorcist 3 is probably the most forgotten movie that I can think of on this list. If there's one that should have been on this list, please let me know in the comment section down below. I'm Best Guy. I hope you enjoyed this top 5 video. There's more videos to come involving, horror stuff for Halloween. So stay tuned. Until next time, bye.